Hey guys, I'm David from Boy Studio, and in this episode we'll show you how to make a stylized anisotropic hair shader. We'll explain step by step everything you need to know to start building the shader network, how to tweak the settings to really find the style that suits you, and we'll even show you how to apply the shader to an actual character so you can see exactly how to unwrap the hair geometry and even how to apply some extra texture details on top. So this tutorial will be a bit longer than usual, but as always, it'll be a lot of fun. So grab a seat and let's get started. All right, so we have our good old sphere here and the Toon shader that we've built over the last few tutorials. And if any of you wants to follow along as we're doing this, you can actually download the scene in the video description of this video, and that way you can reproduce the steps I'm doing if that's the way you prefer to learn. The first thing I'm going to do is turn off the fill light and the kick light here so that we really see what we're doing, and then I'll go to the material tab and go to specular size and bring it down all the way to 0 so that we can start replacing it with our own anisotropic specular feature there. So I'll go in the shader editor and press tab to inspect this node tree, and I will locate the group output to the right here and disconnect it, and I'll bring it all the way to the top so that we can start fresh and just focus on this new feature that we're trying to make. So the main thing that is different in an anisotropic specular compared to a normal one is basically that it's going to be stretched along the tangent of the surface instead of being this very bright spot. So the way we're trying to reproduce this will be to start with a color ramp. And I'll probably need a frame to put stuff into, so let me just create a frame here and rename it Anisotropic and bump up the size. All right, so color ramp. So I'll do Shift A, type color ramp, and put it in there. And I'll need an extra handle here so that I can create this sort of white section in the center here, okay? And I want to map this thing onto my sphere using its UV coordinates. And if I go to the UV editor right now, you can see that it already has some UV mapping. It's actually just the default sphere in Blender, and it comes with UV mapping. But the thing that's great is that it's perfectly mapped for our needs right now. And I say this because I want people to know that you cannot just put this shader on any random object and it will work straight away. You really have to do your job of unwrapping things in a specific way. And I'll show you how to do it on an actual hair geometry at the end of this tutorial. But yeah, just know that it works for this sphere because of the way it's mapped by default. It just happens to work that way. So let me go back to the shader editor, and I will create the texture coordinate. So Shift A, texture coordinate, and I'll need a separate X, Y, Z. So I will take the UV output here and I'll plug it into my separate X, Y, Z, and then I'll plug just the Y value in my color ramp and then the color ramp into my group output. And immediately you can see that my color ramp has been mapped onto my sphere. And the way it works is basically that it's evaluating every point that you see on this square here, and it's going to look at its Y value because that's what we're telling it to do. So it looks at the Y value. It can be anything from 0 to 1 because Y is in the vertical direction, and it's going to use this value to decide what color it's giving it. So if it's at the bottom, it's going to be giving an output of 0. And so it's going to be at the very beginning of this color ramp, 0, so black. And if it's the center, it's going to get this, this white here. And then as it reaches the top, it's going to be black again. So that's why you can see it here. So it's a good start, but obviously it doesn't react as you would expect a specular to do. Namely, as you move your camera, you would probably want the specular to sort of shift around like a specular would, right? So what we're going to need is a way to extract a value from the angle of the camera in relation to the object. And we're going to be doing this using a vector transform. So let's take the vector transform here, and I'm going to change a few settings. So let's keep it at vector, leave it at world, then change it to camera. So we're going to be transferring coordinates from world to camera, camera space. And I'll change this to 0, 0, and -1. So basically, if you're wondering here, it's a vector, so it's X, Y, and Z. It's a direction. And we're telling it, we're feeding it a -1 direction. So in the Z direction, Z is down in this instance. So we're transferring a world vector, it's pointing down, and we're converting it into a camera space. So what happens is that as I move my camera up, it's going to give me a pure blue, and it's going to be black when I look at from the side. So, and what I'm gonna want to do is just add a separate RG or XYZ, it's the same in this case, and just use the Z value so that I get a black and white instead of having this blue. So if I look at it from any angle, it's going to be black, but as I go up, it's going to be perfectly white as my camera aligns with the Z direction that I've set up. And the great thing about this is that I can use a math node. I'll put it in subtract mode. And if I put it here just before the color ramp and feed it my Z value, it's going to change the Y coordinate before it's being fed to the color ramp here. So you see how it moves as I move my camera. So obviously it's much too much right now. So let me just copy this, and I'm going to change this to multiply, and maybe put it at 0.3, so like 30% of the effect you were just seeing. So as you can see now, you sort of see this this ring on the other side, while before you could just see like nothing like this. So it's already much better. All right, so it sort of starts to react like you would expect the anisotropic specular to, but it still doesn't look like hair, because remember, we want to use this for a hair shader. So I want to start breaking this up with a noise texture. So let me create a noise texture and put it here. So I'll change this to 2D, and this time we want to use the X coordinate, okay? And actually, like, let me show you the difference. So if I were to just put the UV coordinates here, so you would see a, if I use a factor, I'll have it in black and white. So you would see a noise texture, okay? Like you would expect. But if you use just the X value, the cool thing is that you can have just these vertical lines, okay? And actually, I'll show you on the plane here so you can see better. So I'll apply the same material. Okay, so you see these vertical lines? That's what's being mapped onto a sphere. And basically, the way we'll be using this to displace our color ramp is that as you move on the x-axis, okay, every vertical line at every point of this x-axis is going to have the same value. So if you move at 0.1, it's going to get maybe 0 because it's black, and then 0.2, maybe it's going to get 1, then 0.1 and 0.2, and etc. So as you use these values to push against the previous color ramp, you're going to create this sort of wave pattern into it, and so it's going to give it some texture. So let me show it in action. I will simply duplicate this. Let me just move this thing around. Okay, to the side. So I'll duplicate this, change it to add, and I'll just add it like this. Okay, show you how it works. So as you can see, it's sort of pushed everything down. Okay. Obviously it's way too low right now, so I need to adjust a few things. First, I'll duplicate this thing and change it to subtract. So we're going to bring it back in the center. Let's leave it at 0.5. So sort of starting to look like something. The node I like to use to control the strength of this noise is bright contrast. Okay, so let's just type Shift A, bright contrast. And if you bring contrast to -1, the cool thing is it goes back to exactly how it was. But as you just pump it up just a bit, you can start having this this noise pattern onto it. Okay, and we're actually going to use a few of these noise textures stacked on top of each other to create a very organic look to our sort of fake hair strands here. So I'm going to rename this. Yeah, I'm going to rename this high frequency. Okay. So this is what we'll use to get those very fine hair details. And I'll pump this to 10, 10, like this, okay? And maybe -1, okay, maybe like this. And then I'll duplicate this thing and I'll rename this low frequency. Use the same X value to feed into the noise texture. And I will, once again, push this bit to the side. I'll duplicate this add node here to have a second one. As I said, we're stacking these on top of each other. So I will plug my second one into here. But this one, instead of using a 10 and 10, or maybe I'll remove the detail here. And I'll type 5, 5, 0, 5 instead. Okay, so it's going to be sort of a longer wave, and we're sort of be able to like, it could be 2 if you wanted to, so it would be a very like long wave or whatever. Obviously you can play with these values however you see fit, but I'm just giving you some options and then you can play around with the sliders. And then I'll create a third one, and this one is very useful. It's going to be called spottiness. And okay, is that how you spell it, with 2 T's? I think so. Anyway, okay, so I'll delete this, and I'll use the X here. And here I think I'm going to be using a bigger scale. And okay, this one, instead of adding it here, I'm going to use a multiply node afterwards, okay? So I'm going to be using this new noise, this new noise as a mask over everything else that we've built, so that every white region is going to appear, but everything that's black in my noise texture is going to disappear. So we'll be able to create some negative space in between this, because right now everything is connected. I want some spots to appear. So I will connect this here. Okay, I'll bump up the contrast quite a bit, so maybe at 10. All right, so as you can see, if you play with the brightness now, you can sort of create holes in there. So you can just have a few spots, or anyway, you understand. So, all right, let's just put it here. Okay, so now that we've done this, what I'd like is just to sharpen this just a bit more. So I'll duplicate this color ramp, but this time I'll remove the extra handle that we've created before and put this to constant. So we're going to get a very super sharp edge. And remember, this is procedural, so you can really zoom infinitely here. And so you can play with this, this value here. But I'm going to have this. And what I like now is to be able to have this slight affect somehow the specular highlight. Like it would feel natural for it to work like this, right? I'd like to have a hot spot somewhere and maybe a softer anisotropic in the back, so that when you move the light, you feel like the light is coming from a specific direction. So I'm going to use a, let me make some space here. Yeah, just reorganize stuff a bit like this. Okay. All right, so I'll create a specular node here, and we'll use this as a mask over all of this. So I'll need a shader to RGB and a separate RGB, and I'm going to use only the red channel. And remember, I need to do this because my key light is casting red light. And if you haven't watched the whole Toon shader series that we've done, you might not like immediately understand why this is casting colored light. So maybe watch part 1 to understand this RGB light technique. If you just want to plug this anisotropic feature on your own shader, then you might not need this. You don't need this separate RGB thing. But if you are working from the shader that we've shown you so far, then use this. And so as you can see, we'll be using this thing as a mask. So let's just change a few settings. I'm going to change the base color to black. I only want the specular. I'll bump the specular to white and change the roughness a bit so we have a sort of a general area that points toward our light here, okay? All right, and we'll use this as a mask. And there's 2 ways we can do this. Either we can put it after everything. So let's try it this way first. I could try it this way. Okay, so as you can see, as you can see, it's just sort of lighted in this section and darker here. But what I prefer to do is, instead of putting it afterwards, after the sharpen effect, we're going to place it before, when things are still a bit soft, and then we'll sharpen everything up so that we will only still have either lighted section or nothing. And it will create a pretty interesting result. Let me just show you. So let's put this here. There you go. And I just need to bump up the specular here. All right, maybe even at, maybe I'll bump it up to 1.5. So yeah, now as you can see, the nice thing is, since we've applied it before, you really get these strands of hair appearing sort of out of nowhere. It looks more hand-drawn, so I really like this style. But I would still like to retain a bit of the anisotropic in the back, not to lose it completely. So I'll, yeah, let me duplicate this color ramp here second time, and I'll use a mix RGB to mix the 2 together, but I'm only going to be using a very small amount of the second one, okay? So why is it not working? Oh, I'm using, yeah, I'm using the alpha. So you need to plug the color there. All right, so I think I'll make this one not constant, but just a bit softer. Yeah, okay. There you go. So it's going to be creating some sort of glow around the lighted area, and just a general impression in the back of her hair strands here. So it's pretty nice. And so there's obviously a lot of settings you can start playing with right now. So you can affect how much your color ramp is being offset by your camera angle with this thing here. And then you can increase the brightness. I find that using this setting is pretty cool. So you can increase the brightness like this, or just have a very, like just a few spots here and there. Maybe I'll break it down like this. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Okay. And All right, I'll leave it at this. So now if we want to control the color of this thing, we'll need an additional mix RGB. So yeah, this is going to be plugging into the factor of this thing. So we'll use everything that we've built so far in black and white. It's going to be the alpha of this new color that we're giving it, and this is going to be the base color. So this will be the color of our anisotropic, and then you can control the secondary thing here, and then I think I'll create another mix RGB, and this one, yeah, and this one will be in color 1, the other black, so that I can turn it on and off, okay? So let's start creating some parameters here and plug this back into our Toon shader. So I'll take this thing here, unparent it with Alt-P, and I'll need to bring it all the way down here. So I could put it right at the very end, but I still want to have my outline after everything. So I'll need to disconnect a few things. So color, this can be a bit confusing. Color 1, okay, so color 1, then this goes here, this goes here, color 1, there. Okay, so I've just inverted the order of the outline in this one. So this one is second to last, and it just needs to recalculate stuff. Okay, so obviously pink is not a great choice of color in this case. I'll just choose a nice blue, and maybe you don't need this plane anymore. All right, and so the first parameter I'm going to create is so I'll drag this little circle in my group out input here, and I'll drag it into my color here. Yeah, and I'll rename this Anisotropic, great bold caps, just so that we really see the different sections a bit clearer. And then I'll duplicate this group input, oops, Alt-P, and I'll need a few things here. So we said this would control the opacity, so we'll call this opacity. And as you can see, it's sort of inverted right now. 1 should be totally opaque, and 0 should be transparent. So let me just add an invert node here, so that things, and I need to disconnect it. Okay, so nice, it's updated. So 0 is now transparent, 1 is completely opaque. Then I'll use this thing, the factor, yeah, this one. So it's going to be our secondary mix. So this one's going to control the amount of this second thing here in the back, where there's no light hitting. And then we're gonna add general brightness. So I'll use the bright in the spottiness. I'll leave it, I'll call it, I don't know, strength. And then I'll use an offset. I can use any one of those 2 subtracts here as an offset. So I'll use it on the high frequency. Call this offset. So you can just move it anywhere you want. Leave it at 0.5. And the last thing I'm gonna use is so where there's this vector transform, there's a multiply node. We're gonna use the value in the multiply node, and this is going to be our camera angle offset. So the difference between these two is that offset is always going to be offsetting this thing, no matter what angle we're looking at it. But the other one is going to only affect the offset if I'm looking at it from the top. So if I'm looking at it from this side, I can play with this value, it's not going to change anything. But if I'm going to look at it from the top, it's going to have a huge effect of where it ends up. So it can be super pinched at the top or just stop before. Okay. So there you go. That's pretty much it. So as I said, you can really play with these values however you want, depending on the style you're looking for. You can really increase the frequency of these things and make some very, very fine hair if you want to. I mean, there's really no limit to what you can do. And you could even like create a tons of parameters here so you can tweak the settings outside in material. I'm not going to do that right now just because I'm running out of time, but I mean, go wild and do whatever you want. Have fun. So I would probably normally end the tutorial here, but I've promised that I would show you how to show you some of the techniques we use to paint textures. And I also said that there's a specific way you need to unwrap things. So what I'm gonna do is close this scene, and in just a few moments, I'll open up a new scene with one of our characters, and I'll show you how we would go about applying this material to the hair of our character and paint some extra details, painted like texture over it to give it some character. So see you in a bit. Okay, so I've opened up my scene with our character Iris here from our project Dinomancers. And just so I can show you her hair, I'll turn off the cloak. And as you can see, so this is the hairpiece that I was talking about. So we used our Anisotropic shader on it. As you can see, the specular follows the direction of the hair strands, and it even works in the back where, you know, the direction does not follow at all the direction of our previous sphere, but it still follows the direction of the hair strands. So I'll show you how to do that. And so I'm going to turn off this final hair here and activate this hairpiece that doesn't have any UVs at all. And I'll show you how to start unwrapping this so it works. So I'm going to pick this piece here, just as an example. And okay. And I'll go U and project from view. And if I press L, I can move this piece here. And what you want to do, just as with your sphere before, is instead of having this sort of thing ending in a triangle, you want to end it as a perfect rectangle. So all these areas here, you want them to align perfectly. And as you can see, as I select this line here, I also select some stuff in the bottom here, and that's because I'm in a UV sync mode. So if you want to select some edges, it's often better to unsync things and then select your whole model, and then you can select your edges. So let me turn off proportional modeling, and I'll just select these with Alt click and scale with S, and then S, pressing X to scale in the X direction. So very quickly, I'll just press S, Y, S, Y, S, X. Yeah, so you get the drill. It's not the most interesting thing to watch, so I'll just end this here. You understand the principle. So as you finish straightening all these lines here, you can see this specular start to appear. And the cool thing is that you can scale this horizontally and vertically to affect the shape it has. And once you find a cool shape that you like, it's always going to retain that shape no matter the angle you're looking at it, because it's using the UV, it's applying the noise texture on the UV coordinates. So it's like if you were texturing this piece of thing. So this one was pretty easy because it's already aligned with our camera in the world coordinates. But let's take this piece here that's not aligned at all like our sphere was. So the way we do this, let me switch to shape face selection mode. So I'll select this piece here, maybe up to here, and make sure I'm not selecting stuff in the back. Okay, so I'll press U, project from view, then I'll select this other piece here, and do U U project from view. Okay. So I'm selecting everything by pressing L. Okay. So what I need to do is align this thing like the sphere was previously. So you see all these things that's sort of curve around and end up in a tip here. What I need is this to be completely straight, and all these lines to be perfectly straight horizontally. So it takes a bit of work. It probably took me a couple hours to do the whole hair model on our final character. I'll try to do it in a few minutes here so that you are not bored to death. And once I'm done with this piece here, I'll need to do the same on the other piece, and I'll need to weld them together. So let's say it's almost good enough. Just need to maybe do this piece here. Okay, almost good enough. Okay, and I need to piece this back together with the other thing here. So I'll activate UV sync, and that way I can, in edge select mode, see those things light up. That means they are connected. So if I select them all at the same time and press V, it's going to suggest me a welding sort of position, and I can weld them back together. Let me just unsync the stuff, and there you go. So we can continue straightening things up, and yeah, so we'll say that this is good enough. So as you can see, now my specular is turning around in the good direction. And if I were to rotate this, you see I could sort of influence what direction they're going. But since I've aligned them perfectly, that's why they follow the right direction. And I can, as always, scale this up and down, horizontally and vertically, just, you know, will depend on your model and what you're trying to achieve. But that's the general idea. So let's say I've done all the unwrapping on my thing. It looks like this. And I want to start applying some texture to it. So let me just show you, for example, what we did on final hair. We added some darker outline here that go over the specular, and some painted shadows here that go under the specular. So there's two methods being used here, and I'll show you how to do both. So I'll turn off my final hair and activate final hair, well, hair with no texture, and show you how to do it. So I'll go in my shader editor, and first method, painting underneath my specular. So I'll create a new image texture, and it's going to be, I'll click on new, and I'll click this ×4, call this hair texture mask, turn off alpha. And all right, so one thing we need to do first is do a second set of UV map, because let's look at the UV map right now. So this is the UV map for this piece of hair. It's all over the place, and it's normal because we're just placing things in a way that makes sense for this anisotropic specular, and we need to do that, but it's really not useful to apply texture to it because it goes outside the square, things are overlapping. So we're going to create a second set of UV map to use for texture. So go into your object data, your little green triangle, and then you see UV maps here. I've already renamed this anisotropic UV map. You can create another one, and we'll call this texture UV map. So let's leave the little camera icon on this one, so it will use this one by default, but I can still go into that one and select all this stuff and go to UV Pack Island. So now I have two different UV sets, and this one I can actually paint textures over. I could even minimize stretch here. And then if I go back to my shader editor, if I create a new UV map node, I can select my texture UV map and plug into my hair texture mask. That way it's going to be using this one, which you can actually paint texture over. So to paint texture under my specular, I will create a mix RGB node and plug this color into my factor. So we're going to be painting a mask, actually, not a texture. And this mask is going to drive this new color that we're going to paint. So color 1 is going to be the previous base color that I was using. And color 2, I'm going to pick the color, but make it just a bit darker. And then I plug this into base color. And you're not going to see anything, obviously, because it's already, it's just black at the moment. But if I go to texture paint, there you go, hair texture mask. Now I can paint, you need to paint. So you're either going to be painting white or black because it's just so black and white texture. And you can sort of paint some darker region. So there's a bit of delay here because I've activated a stabilize stroke. But you can just erase stuff by painting in black and white. And you really don't have to worry about like picking the right color or anything. It's really just black and white. You cannot mess anything up, and you can always just select the color that you really want here afterwards. So that's the nice thing. You paint the region you want, and then you can adjust it later on. So I can sort of try to match my shadow here if I wanted to. So yeah, let's say it's like this. So this is the first method. The second method, we're going to be adding a new node in our node setup to be able to paint over everything. It's going to be very simple. I just go in there, press tab, go at the very end here and create a mix RGB node. And let me just copy my group and put here. Okay. Oops. Zoom in so you can see what I'm doing. So mix RGB, I'll put it just before the group output, and we'll be creating a new parameter for, so I already have parameters here. So painted over mask, I'll plug into factor, and paint over color, I'll put it into color 2, and color 1 is going to be what the previous node was, and then this is going to be plugged into group output. So perfect, I can jump back, and there you go. If I duplicate this thing here, I'll just create a new one. It's going to be hair, or whatever, air mask over. And this one I'll just plug into my painted over mask here. And I'm going to choose the color of my outline because I want to paint with the same dark brown. And then if you go to texture paint, let's see if my new texture has appeared. Not yet, so maybe I'll just go to object mode and switch back to texture again just so that it can update. Oh yeah, so hair mask over, there you go. So now I can paint with white, and there you go. I have stuff that appears over everything, and I can just like paint whatever I want. And I'm using control to erase, so it goes pretty quickly. Once you're done, you just need to go to press Shift F10 and go into UV editor, or sorry, the image editor. Press Shift F10 twice, whatever, and go fetch your hair texture mask, and you save it, save it wherever you want. Save it on my desktop, and your other hair texture hair mask over, you save it too, because it's might not save as you save your Blender file. And there you go. So that's how we painted our texture on all our characters, and that's how you need to unwrap your hair so that the Anisotropic new feature that we've made works on any geometry. So I hope you've learned a few things. Let me know. As always, if you have any comments, and me and the team will answer you as quick as possible. And until next tutorial, be safe. I'll see you next time.